Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 789. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about beaches and castles and ladas, bears and erratics, and raccoon dogs as we go to the nation of Estonia.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Estonia. I'd like to welcome to the show Betty Reed from BettyReedWrites.com, and that's Reed with two E's. And Betty has come to talk to us about Estonia. Betty, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
And what's your connection with Estonia?
None. I have no connection.
You've been there, though.
Yes. Other than wanting to visit, that's my only connection.
And why should someone go to Estonia?
That is a really good question. I tend to look for places that are off the beaten path. Mm-hmm. And I am also interested in going to countries that were former communist countries because I find it fascinating to see how the culture either has been maintained or not, and to witness the changes. And even though Estonia has been independent from the Soviets for 30 years, you can still see those transformations throughout the country.
Excellent. Well, what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
I would recommend starting in the city of Tartu, and I apologize if I am butchering the language.
You are not a student of the Estonian language. Should we just establish that up front? And I'm not either, so I can't help you.
Okay, it's a deal. From there, we went to the Brown Bears hideout. We also went to another city, much smaller, Rakvere. And then we headed into the Lahaina National Park, where we stayed at a manor house and then went up to the small towns along the northern coast, which are really beautiful and very worthwhile seeing.
Excellent. So you started us in Tartu. What are we going to do in Tartu? And this is the second biggest city? Yeah, in Estonia.
It is. It's also the oldest city in Estonia.
Oh.
It dates back to the 11th century. It's known as the intellectual capital because of its university, which was founded in 1632. When we were there, it was August, so it was kind of quiet. But when the university is in session, it transforms into a student town, which kind of explains all the pubs and clubs throughout the town that we see. I liked Tartu a lot because it is much quieter than Tallinn. Tallinn is beautiful, but there are other beautiful places, and I think Tartu is one of them. The town square is very scenic with a pink town hall in the background, and there's a famous statue of two students kissing passionately under an umbrella in the middle of the fountain.
Okay.
Kind of unusual. And the square slopes down to the river. We found a cafe and just sat there in the sun, just enjoying our food and the scenery. And in the back of the town hall is the Toomemagi Hill, which is a labyrinth of narrow streets that you can get lost in a fun way. So you can find little shops, you find little places to eat, and there are plenty of museums and historic churches and old town houses and old bridges, and plenty of museums.
Okay. Are there specific churches, museums, townhouses, and other things that you would recommend we see while we're there?
Yes, there is a citizens museum which shows how an 1830s family would have lived during that time. All the furniture are period pieces, and the tour guide explains what family life would have been like. And there's another museum which we did not visit because my son was 18 years old at the time, but I've heard is fantastic, and that is the Toy Museum. So I think families should not bypass that museum.
Okay. Were you touring on your own, or did you take a tour of the area?
We almost always tour on our own. We use guidebooks, and we just get lost and end up somewhere. To be honest, we just do not like being led around in a group and all those quick visits with just a 2-sentence introduction to whatever it is. We really like to stay in a place longer if we like it, or leave sooner if we don't.
Okay. What else are you going to recommend for us in Tartu?
The university itself is pretty amazing. It has an emphasis on science. The university itself was established in 1803, and some of the world's top researchers have studied and worked and taught there. But for me as a musician, what was important is that it is also known for a very famous composer. Arvo Pärt is world-renowned. He's a multi-Grammy-winning modern composer, and he is Estonia's musical treasure. He studied at the university, and he's now a professor there. The university has these beautiful botanical gardens, so if you need a break from buildings and historic whatever, you can go look at some really nice flowers.
Good to know. Any favorite restaurants or dishes that you tried? You mentioned the food.
Estonians actually forage in many forests for a huge variety of mushrooms. So cooking with mushrooms, they use a lot of potatoes, they use a lot of barley, but the mushrooms are really delicious. They saute, they roast, they bake them, they do just about everything. If you like sauerkraut and beetroot, potato or cabbage salads, you'll be in heaven here. There is one dish that I just could not bring myself to taste. It's called sult, and it is prepared by boiling down animal bones, letting it cool into a gelatin, and then they add chunks of meat and slices of vegetables and let the whole mixture cool into a very, shall I say, unusual looking jelly.
Okay.
I did not try that, but the other things were very good.
Okay. Should we move on to the next place in your itinerary? You were going out to see the bears.
Yes. Our next experience was probably the highlight of our trip, and that was to observe brown bears in their natural habitat. I tend to really like this kind of experience. And when I was Googling for unusual things to do in Estonia, this popped up. I found out about this company called Natur Est, which is an ecotourism company. During the Soviet era, bears were hunted and their numbers shrank to less than 300. But after Estonia became independent, they were protected. And Estonia is now home to over 700 brown bears. This company, Natur Est, purchased more than 220 acres of taiga forest, which adjoins 2 national parks. And there are about 350 bears that live in those woods. The taiga forest is something kind of unique. It's a biodome of pines, spruces, larches, bogs, and grass meadows. And the habitat supports lots of animals. The brown bears, of course, flying squirrels, wild boar, elk, deer, otters, wolves, and, unbeknownst to us when I booked the trip, lynx. Luckily, they stay away from humans most of the time. So Natur Est built these custom cabinets that have meter-length windows where you can sit and prop up your binoculars and observe the bears lumbering out of the woods at sunset.
So they're hides then.
Yes, exactly. And they call them the brown bear hideouts.
Okay.
The company employs villagers for all the jobs. Of course, we were kind of wondering who would get the job of planting the fish in those hidden spots for the bears to find. I'm not sure that I would volunteer to walk through the forest with fish.
With bear food in your hands?
Yes, exactly. Especially
The concern
after
being
seeing
the bear might get confused what portion is food and what portion is you. Yeah, I get that.
Yes. So the cabins were actually quite comfortable. They're bunk beds. There's a compost toilet. There's no running water, and you have to bring all your own food and drinks. The cost is about $90 per person for one night, and I thought it was really well worth it. To get there, all we had were coordinates. There were no signs.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I felt like we were on a spy mission. We had to actually count the kilometers to know where to exit. Once we got off that main road, all we had were pitted dirt roads with potholes. But I won't go into all the details of how we didn't find it and then found it. But we did find the meeting point eventually. And as soon as we got out of the car, we were welcomed by a swarm of mosquitoes. There was a lot of slapping going around. So once we found our meeting point, eventually the guide appeared and he led us through the forest. He pointed out boar prints in some of the bog areas. And then he pointed out trees that were scratched. Apparently the brown bears use these trees to sharpen their claws. I guess it's their idea of a manicure.
Okay.
In the hideouts, once we were there, we had to wait for a long time. But the first bear appeared around 7 o'clock.
Now, you were there in the summer, so 7 o'clock is still, you've got something like 3 more hours of daylight, I'm guessing.
Exactly. The sun
Okay.
doesn't set until about 9:30 in the summer,
Okay.
and even then you still get another good hour of dusk and
Got it.
twilight. So the first bear appeared and he was pretty huge. He's not like the cuddly teddy bears that we imagine. Had a very long pointed snout, these massive legs, a huge humped back, and really was not looking all that friendly. And he sniffed around a long time and then found the treasure. He had to pounce on logs to get to it. He had to dig into the ground. And it took him quite a few tries. So it was very interesting to watch this whole process. And then when he finally found the fish, he ran off into the woods. And
Okay.
later, another bear came out and did the same. And the first bear returned. So we had quite a few visits from different bears. It was just fascinating. It was like a role reversal. We were in the cage, but it felt right. I think this is the way it should be. It is their home. And it was just fascinating to watch them in their own home without intruding, other than the planted fish, that is.
Other than the planted fish, yeah. For purists, some people may have some problems with that. I understand.
Yes, yeah.
And then my understanding is there's also a microphone in the hide so you can hear some of the outside sounds without being out there.
Yes, it was not hooked up when we were there. So
Okay.
we did not hear the sounds.
Got it.
I'm sure it would have been a very nice surround sound experience.
Now, were there special instructions that you had in terms of what you could carry or bring or not bring?
Yes, no alcohol. And of
Okay.
course, it was take in, take out. Whatever you take in, you take out.
Sure.
And as far as there weren't really any food restrictions.
Okay.
But I can say that when you're in one of those hideouts and there's nothing else to do, you hear everything. It's so magnified. There was a couple from Australia there, and at some point they pulled out a bag of like potato chips, and it sounded like thunder clapping as they opened the bag. So just waiting and listening kind of sharpens your senses. That was also a good experience.
And they were in the same hide as you?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
How many people fit in a hide?
8 people can
Okay.
fit in a hide. It was just the 5 of us, my family of 3 and the Australian couple.
Got it. Okay.
We also saw other animals. We saw an elk and something called a raccoon dog, which I thought was a badger at first. My son
Okay.
thought it was a mongoose, and we were both wrong. It kind of looks like a raccoon with
A fat raccoon.
yes, an elongated body like a dog. And that's why they're called raccoon dogs. And they were eating something orange. It looked like a mushroom. And they would come back in and out. Then they came back with the young ones, the family. And while the young ones were eating, I'm assuming it was the father was on his hind legs the whole time, listening. And then the mother would take over as the guard. The father would eat. It was nice to see that kind of their process for having a meal in the woods.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the common raccoon dog, they call it, but not common where I live. So,
No, me neither. It was worth going. It was just fascinating to see these animals in the wild. I have to say, I slept very well. I don't think the Australian woman did. She was kind of nervous, and she reported that there was a bear at 2:30 and an elk at 4 o'clock, and then another bear at like 5:30, and so she kept track of the nightlife.
and then you have to be able to hike a mile into the woods or something like that to get
Exactly.
to that. Okay.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house, surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds. Actually, I knew it was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com. And don't just travel, explore.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Not wheelchair friendly, but okay.
No. And then in the morning, you just hike out yourself. A guide doesn't come to pick you
Got it.
up. So we did that, and we had eaten everything we bought, except for one pastry that we all shared. But we were starving. So we headed to the nearest breakfast place, which was actually 31 miles away.
Okay, so plan accordingly.
Yes. I think this is one of the reasons that these beautiful cities like Tallinn are really popular. You will never have to drive 31 miles to get breakfast in Tallinn.
No. Well, and you mentioned Tallinn being a particularly busy city. Also depends whether or not there's a cruise ship in town. That city's character changes significantly.
Yes.
When you're there with cruise ship passengers, the city square fills up with lots and lots of people. And as I understand, also the prices go up in some of the restaurants and literally go down, at 5 o'clock when the cruise ship people leave. So
Yes, exactly.
I can't attest to the rest because I was only there on a cruise ship. So
Well, I can tell you, there are no cruise ships on the north coast of Estonia. Really, it's a quiet area, except for a few places with long sandy beaches, which I will recommend. But before we get there, we landed in Rakvere, a city that actually has a really fantastic castle. It was built in the 1300s. And like most castles, of course, it was damaged in several wars, but the government has done a great job of renovating it. And what's really different about it is, for one thing, it's not as crowded. And the second thing is that you can actually try out all these different activities. Like you can try your hand at archery and jousting. And of course, you can visit different rooms like the barber shop / surgery room.
barbers were the original surgeons. That is true.
Exactly.
Which is one of the reasons they have the white and red striped poles. The red being blood of surgery. This is where that comes from.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. I will think about that next time I go past a barber
That's what
shop.
I've been told, at least. Only believe half of what I say is the truth, because knowing which half is true. But
So we finally got to the city and we found Cafe Lada. And I had no idea why that name, but I was told that it's named after a car. And sure enough, there was a Lada parked out in front.
the
It's-
Russian car.
Yes, exactly.
Soviet car, I should say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In doing research about the car, one thing that I found really interesting is that it was originally produced through a joint effort with Fiat, and this was back in the 1960s. So, in one way, it explains why this car has been so popular and reliable. It's not like the East German Trabi, the two-cylinder car that putt-putts around and emitting
leaves
clouds
a
of...
cloud of smoke behind it, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So the Lada is definitely more eco-friendly and has been very reliable. And apparently, Lada is now owned by Renault.
Okay. I did not know that. Okay.
Me neither. So we were happy to have breakfast there, the usual things like potato salad and smoked herring. But they also had pancakes and muffins, and they were all served with sour cream. throughout the whole experience of eating in Estonia, the only stick of butter I ever saw was in a supermarket. It's just not a popular thing to put on your bread or food. Sour cream is, however.
Okay. I could picture that.
Yeah, especially with all those beet and potato salads.
Right.
And
Yeah, exactly.
it's like perfect.
So we should say that we started in the southern portion of the country. I mean, it's not a big country.
Right.
We started
right.
in the southern half, Tartu being a little closer to halfway up, but a little further south. And now we've gone almost up to the northern part of the country. So when you talked about how many miles it is, it's not that many miles from Tartu up to Rakvere.
Exactly. Yes. The roads are pretty good, as long as you don't get off on those dirt roads. Rakvere apparently is also known for being the home of the Punk Song Festival, which is held every 3 years. Unfortunately, it was not being held while we were there. We were very sad, but maybe next time.
Okay. I've been wondering where the Punk Song Festival was held.
Now you know. So after the beer experience, we were kind of ready for a little bit of luxury, and I had booked a room in a manor house. There are tons of manor houses throughout Estonia, and these are more posh houses that the Germans and Russians built. A lot of them were like summer villas, and most of them have been renovated and are now like hotels and spas and resorts.
Okay.
So our goal was to be in Lahaina National Park. And this particular manor house was in the park. There are 4 manor houses in that park, and they're equipped with all the amenities. Ours was an old manor house dating back to the 1800s, but they had the usual sauna, hot tub, swimming pool, spa. You could play tennis, badminton, everything. And for kids, they have a little mini golf area.
And which was the one that you stayed in?
Vihula Manor Country Club.
Got it.
It was really pleasant, very relaxing. There's a man-made lake that you can rent a boat and just go row out. And the advantage is it's about $140 a night, which for a resort hotel with all those amenities is a pretty good price. One really original thing is that they have a windmill on site from the early 1800s. And the fun part is that you can access it, but you have to go ask permission from the windmill attendant, and he will give you the key. And the key is about a foot long, made of iron. Like if you can imagine, a foot long iron skeleton key that you put into the lock. And then once inside, you can climb up to the platform, and you have a really nice view of the surrounding area, the marshes, the pastures, the forests. It was definitely worthwhile getting the key and going up.
Okay. Well, and you're in Lahaina National Park now, so you're on the north coast in between Rakvere and Tallinn.
Yes. The other thing we enjoyed at that hotel was that they have a gourmet restaurant. And what I ordered was absolutely delicious. It was elk filet. I also tried a little bit of roast duck. Everything was just great. I have to say, though, the staff is definitely kind of a hangover of the Soviet attitude.
Soviet style of quote-unquote service.
Yes, exactly. After a description of the food, and we have 20 seconds to figure out what we want, it's not like, well, maybe you should order or think about this. It was more, well, what do you want? I guess it works for them. By the time the 3 of us had eaten appetizers, a main entree, dessert, a bottle of wine, coffee, it came out to $120, like $40 per person. And that was like the splurge in comparison, because meals in Estonia are really inexpensive. It's one of the reasons that I think it's great to go there. You can get 2 meals a day for about $27, which, especially if you have a family, that can be very important.
Right.
So we were in the midst of Lahama National Park, which is where we wanted to be. It's a haven for bird watchers, hikers, nature lovers, and although we did not do it as a day trip, it is possible to do as a day trip from Tallinn. What we really liked were the forest trails. They're through dry pine areas. You come across bogs, and they smell like rich earth, and you hear the frogs. Most of the land is flat, so hiking is pretty easy. There is an old growth forest in Owandu, and although we did not do this particular trail, they have a beaver trail where you can observe the animals and decide if they are as busy as we think they are. You can also go horse riding, you can visit sheep farms. We did not do that, and we did not canoe through bogs or on the Baltic Sea, but we did see plenty of people enjoying that activity.
Okay.
And if you don't like walking, they have plenty of bicycle paths and places where you can rent a bicycle. In the park, they have campsites available. I think they're about $60 or $70 a night. And you can camp very close to those northern coastal towns. One of the towns we enjoyed was Altia. It's an old fishing village. Apparently it dates back to like 1465. What they fish for mostly in that area is herring and flounder. What was interesting about Altia is that all the houses are in one street. So like there's this row of houses, and that is the town. And they're all wood, and almost all of them have thatched roofs. And their claim to fame is this giant wood swing that you stand on. It kind of looks more like a catapult, and you really have to use a lot of energy to get it going. But it really is a giant swing. I would say it's probably maybe like 12 feet tall.
Okay.
That swing is in front of a tavern known for typical foods like blood sausage. Something that we tried and liked was kugelis, which is a potato pudding. And they mix eggs and onions and bacon into it. It's very tasty. Also in Alta, there's a spit of land where the park service has rebuilt these fishing net sheds. So you can get an idea of the fisherman's life in that time period. There are also 2 farms there, and one of them, the Tumarava farm, offers accommodations that you can stay in overnight. We did not do that because we had our luxury manor house. We wanted to go back to that.
As we do.
Yes.
Actually, one thing about, speaking of the luxury manor house, you mentioned that it was German aristocrats, which is correct. That's where the people who used to own this were from, which may seem a little far east for that. But of course, Tallinn was one of the cities in the Hanseatic League. It was the northernmost and easternmost city in the Hanseatic League of these trading cities all over the Baltic. And so there would have been a lot of German merchants in that area from the 1400s to the 1600s, and some of whom would have stayed in the area until later on when a lot of those people were expelled after World War II, for instance.
Yes, that is exactly right. In fact, my husband is German, and I remember his uncle telling us the story of he originally came from a part of, it used to be Germany, but then was taken over by Russia, and he was expelled.
Sure.
So it does happen, and there's a lot of history of that. Something I found out, which I thought was interesting, is that Estonia has a coastline that is over 2,300 miles long.
Seriously?
And, yes. And the Soviets had a lot of land and sea to cover and to guard. And there are over 70 lighthouses in Estonia. Most of them are still working. And they look a little different from, I live in the Boston area, so New England lighthouses have a certain look
Sure.
to them. Estonian lighthouses, they're concrete cylinders. They're painted white. They have a rounded black roof with a knob in the middle. And they look like flour canisters to me. You just pick off the roof and find flour inside. But that's what they look like. And there was one in the town of Vergi, which is also known for its beach. I have to say the beaches on the northern coast, the water is so clear. It's cold, but it's clear. And the sand it's that fine white sand that you just love walking through. There's a town called Virzu, which attracts hordes of Estonians in the summer. It has a really long sandy beach, and apparently this is a big summer goal for many Estonian families, is just to pass a week or two in Virzu. There's another town I thought had something unique about it, and that is Kasmu. You could actually book a tour, a sailing tour, on a replica of a Viking ship. This town was a shipbuilding town, and it still is. Of course, not with the number of ship orders that they used to have, but they still are building ships. They converted their maritime school into a museum, and Cosmo became the place to spend your summer if you're an intellectual or an artist. It just became like a haven for these minds and was very well known for that. But the other thing that it's well known for are the erratics. And I did not know what an erratic was, other than...
And we're not talking about people at this point. We're now in geology.
Exactly.
Which is important to distinguish here, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So an erratic is a rock that has been deposited by a moving glacier at some point, and that rock has nothing to do with the rocks of that
Surrounding
area.
rocks, yeah.
Yeah, so they're very different. They can be as small as a pebble. There are others that are just enormous. They can be like 18,000 tons.
Small as a pebble, as big as a house.
Yes, exactly. Right. So we saw a lot of different ones. Some are like perfect spheres, and out in the ocean, they look pretty funny. It looks like a bunch of like giant bald heads swimming in the sea. Some of the spheres are sliced perfectly in half. Some are like jagged shapes. It's just a huge array of different rocks. So that's very fun.
In terms of, as we start to wrap this up, anything else in terms of the country in general that people should know before they go to Estonia? You were getting by in English rather than Estonian,
Yes.
we're going to guess.
Yes, that's actually a good point. The second language in Estonia is still Russia. And even though the public schools, everything is taught in Estonian, there are still Russian language schools where students learn Russian as their primary language. However, if you want to go to university, you have to speak Estonian. Luckily, they also know English. They're fluent in English. Just about everybody we met spoke some English, and there was really no problem in getting around. I think if I were to say what struck me about Estonia is the nature. It's beautiful nature with such a variety of the bogs, the forests, the marshes, the ocean. And especially as climate change starts to affect our world and our lives, it was just so peaceful to be in a place that was itself. Just no big resort hotels on the beaches, or it was just nature itself, which was really beautiful, and it protects the animals' habitats. And if I were going to say anything to encourage families, it is to take your kids along. I know my son will never forget seeing those bears.
Sure. I agree. We traveled with our kids and then they left. Then they moved away. But, hey, that's their problem. As we get to some of our wrap-up questions, you are standing in the prettiest spot you saw in Estonia. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Oh, it was inside that windmill on that platform, looking out at just this beautiful landscape, unmarred by skyscrapers or even houses. It was in all the different colors. It was beautiful.
Excellent. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Estonia?
The names. A lot of their first names are just one syllable. Like one of the owners of Natur Est is named Peep. Or maybe I'm saying wrong. Maybe it's Pep. But it's very common to have just a one-syllable name in Estonia. I thought that was funny.
Interesting. If you had to summarize Estonia in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Castles.
Okay.
Brown bears. Oh, that's 2 words.
You can take bears. That's all right. Well,
Okay. And unspoiled land.
okay.
Oh,
Something like 5 words, but that's okay. We got the idea. That's where we're going for you. Our guest again has been Betty Reed from Betty Reed Writes. Again, 2 E's in Reed. And Betty, if we wanted to send people to your best post on Estonia in Betty Reed Writes, where would we send them?
Yes, I do have a post up about Estonia. It's about our brown bears experience.
Excellent. Well, you'll send that to me and I'll put a link to it in the show notes of this episode if people want to read more about the untamed forests and curious brown bears of the wilds in Estonia. I guess you don't need to send me the link. I found it.
Okay, great. Yes, that's it.
Excellent. Betty, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Estonia.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially with their donations for as little as $5 a month. You can be a patron of Amateur Traveler. To learn more, you can go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I had a couple reviews of the show on the Apple Podcast app recently, and thanks to those people who take the time to do this. At 5 stars from Kinsey81, who said, "Awesome podcast. I just discovered this podcast about 5 days ago and can't stop listening to it. So many locations to hear about. We're already planning a family road trip to the Blue Ridge Parkway based off an episode." Excellent. And Big Stick Carpet, also 5 stars. Excellent travel podcast. Chris really puts in the extra work to make this podcast great, from the interesting guests to the insightful questions and real-time Googling for facts and clarifications. I especially appreciate that he breaks every episode into chapters with a different photo, notes, and links for each topic or place discussed. I'm sure that's a ton of extra work, but I really appreciate it. And thanks so much. It is, and I'm glad that someone noticed. Big news on the Amateur Traveler trip front. I have a final price for the trip to Turkey, and so I have sent out the information for the trip to the people who signed up to try to go 2 years ago, and so they'll get the first chance at this for the first week, and then next week the patrons of the show will get an opportunity to book if they are interested in coming, and then the Amateur Traveler trip group, amateurtraveler.com/trips, is where I will announce the trip more publicly. Well, it's a private Facebook group, but to anybody who joins that group in 2 weeks from today when I'm recording this, which is February 7th. And so if you're interested in going, it won't be announced on the podcast until quite likely it's already booked up. So if you're interested in going, do join that private Facebook group. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
Got to see one more